The scream that tore through the winter air made Owen Nash drop the reins of his horse and turn toward the mountainside where snowflakes fell thick as cotton. He had been riding through the Colorado Territory on his way back to his ranch when the blizzard hit, and now, through the white veil, he could barely make out a figure stumbling down the rocky slope. The woman's dress was catching on branches and rocks, tearing with each desperate step she took away from something or someone. Owen spurred his horse forward without hesitation, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air as he pushed through drifts that were already knee-high on his mount. "Help! Please, someone help me!" The woman cried out again, her voice hoarse and terrified. Owen reached her just as she tripped over a hidden root and went sprawling into the snow. He dismounted quickly and rushed to her side, his boots crunching in the fresh powder. When he turned her over gently, he saw a young woman with dark hair plastered to her pale face, her lips tinged blue from the cold. Her dress, once probably a fine traveling outfit, was torn in multiple places, the fabric hanging in strips that exposed her skin to the biting wind. "Madam, can you hear me?" Owen asked, brushing snow from her face, her eyes fluttered open, brown and frightened. "They killed him. They killed the driver and took everything. I just ran." "Who did this?" "Outlaws, 4 of them. They stopped our stagecoach about 2 miles back." She was shivering violently now, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. Owen did not hesitate. He shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin coat, the one his mother had given him before she passed 5 years ago, and wrapped it around the woman's trembling shoulders. The cold immediately bit into him through his wool shirt, but he had grown up in these mountains and could handle it better than she could in her current state. "No, you will freeze," she protested weakly, trying to push the coat back toward him. "I've got another blanket on my horse, and we need to get you warm right now," Owen said firmly, though he knew the blanket was thin and would do little against this storm. "Can you stand?" She nodded and let him help her to her feet. Her legs buckled immediately, and Owen caught her, supporting most of her weight. "Easy now. My horse is right here. We need to find shelter fast. This blizzard is only getting worse." "What about the outlaws?" she asked, glancing back up the mountain with fear in her eyes. "They would be fools to keep moving in this weather. Most likely they have found a cave or something to wait it out," Owen said, though he kept his hand near his revolver just in case. "What is your name?" Victoria Jensen," she managed through chattering teeth. "Owen Nash." "Hold on tight, Miss Jensen. I know a line shack about a mile west of here. It is not much, but it will keep us alive until this storm passes." He lifted her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her steady while he held the reins with the other. Victoria leaned back against his chest, and he could feel how violently she was shaking even through his thick coat. The wind howled around them as Owen urged his horse forward, trusting the animal's instincts more than his own vision in the whiteout conditions that were rapidly developing. The ride to the line shack felt like an eternity. Owen's shirt was soaked through with snow, and he had lost feeling in his ears and fingers, but he kept his focus on the barely visible landmarks he knew from years of working this territory. Victoria had stopped shivering about 10 minutes into the ride, which worried him more than the shaking had. He talked to her constantly, trying to keep her conscious. "Stay with me, Victoria. Tell me where you were headed." "Oregon City," she mumbled. "My aunt lives there. She is the only family I have left." "Where are you coming from?" "Missouri. My parents died last year, yellow fever. I sold the farm and was using the money to start fresh." Her voice broke. "They took it all. Every cent I had was in my traveling bag." Owen felt a surge of anger at the men who had done this. The frontier could be a hard place, but there were lines that decent men did not cross. Robbing a lone woman and killing an innocent stagecoach driver in cold blood was the work of cowards. "We will figure it out once you are safe and warm," he promised. The line shack finally appeared through the snow like a ghost materializing from the white. It was a small log structure, barely big enough for two people, that ranchers used when moving cattle through the high country. Owen dismounted and helped Victoria down, then half-carried her to the door. The leather hinges were stiff with cold, but he managed to force it open and get her inside. The interior was dark and musty but blessedly free of wind. Owen settled Victoria on the floor against the wall, then went back out to tend to his horse. He led the animal to the lean-to attached to the shack, removed the saddle, and rubbed the horse down as best he could with handfuls of dry straw he found stored there. He grabbed his saddlebags and the thin blanket, then made sure the horse had access to the small amount of hay in the corner before heading back inside. Victoria had not moved. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was shallow. Owen knew he needed to get a fire going immediately. There was a small stone fireplace in the corner, and thankfully, someone had left a supply of wood stacked beside it. His fingers were so numb he could barely strike the match, but on the third try, he got the kindling to catch. He fed the small flame carefully until it grew strong enough to add larger pieces of wood. As warmth began to fill the tiny space, Owen turned his attention back to Victoria. She was still wearing his coat, but her dress underneath was soaked through. He knew she needed to get out of those wet clothes or risk pneumonia, but the situation was delicate. He was a stranger to her, and propriety mattered, even in life-or-death situations. "Miss Jensen," he said softly, touching her shoulder. "Victoria, you need to wake up." Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually clearing as she registered where she was. "Did we make it? We are at the line shack. Safe for now. But you need to get out of those wet clothes. I am going to turn my back and stand by the door. There are dry shirts and pants in my saddlebag. They will be too big, but they are warm and dry." He saw her face flush with embarrassment despite her pallor. "I cannot wear men's clothing. It is either that or freeze to death, and I did not drag you through a blizzard to have you die of stubbornness," Owen said, trying to keep his tone gentle but firm. He pulled out his spare clothes and set them near the fire. "I will not look. You have my word as a gentleman." Before she could protest further, he turned his back and moved to the door, staring out at the storm through the cracks in the wood. He heard rustling behind him, punctuated by gasps and quiet whimpers of pain. It took her a long time, which told him her fingers were probably as numb as his had been. "I am decent," she finally said, her voice small. Owen turned around and had to suppress a smile. Victoria was swimming in his clothes, the shirt hanging almost to her knees and the pants rolled up multiple times at the ankles. Her dark hair was starting to dry in waves around her face, and some color had returned to her cheeks thanks to the fire. She had kept his coat wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl. "Better?" he asked. She nodded, pulling the coat tighter. "Thank you for everything. I do not know what would have happened if you had not found me. Let us not think about that." Owen hung her wet dress near the fire to dry, averting his eyes from the undergarments she had bundled up and tucked beside it. He then attended to his own soaked shirt, stripping it off and wringing it out before hanging it up as well. He caught Victoria quickly looking away when he turned back around, her cheeks flushing again. He settled on the floor across from her, the fire between them, and wrapped himself in the thin blanket. It was not much, but the fire was doing most of the work now. The storm raged outside, wind howling through the gaps in the walls, but inside their small shelter, they were alive and getting warmer. "Tell me about your aunt in Oregon City," Owen said. wanting to keep her talking and distracted from the trauma she had just endured. Victoria pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Aunt Margaret is my mother's older sister. She married a shopkeeper 20 years ago and moved west. She wrote to me after Mama and Papa died, told me I should come live with her. She and Uncle Thomas never had children of their own. That was kind of her. Yes, I did not want to stay in Missouri, too many memories. Every corner of that farm reminded me of them. Her voice caught and she wiped at her eyes. And now I have nothing to bring with me. No money, no belongings, nothing. I am a burden before I even arrive. You are alive. That is what matters, Owen said. And you are not a burden, you are a survivor. She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Owen was aware that he probably did not look like much. Bare-chested with his chest hair matted from the wet shirt, his blonde hair stuck to his forehead, and several days' worth of beard on his face. But Victoria's expression was not one of judgment. It was gratitude mixed with something else he could not quite read. "Why did you give me your coat?" she asked suddenly. "You could have just given me a blanket from your horse." Owen shrugged, feeling uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "The coat is warmer. You needed it more than I did." "But it looks well made. Expensive. What if it gets ruined?" "Then it gets ruined. It is just a coat, Miss Jensen. Your life is worth more than a piece of clothing." She was quiet for a moment, running her fingers over the sheepskin. "It is a beautiful coat. The lining is so soft. Someone made this with great care." "My mother," Owen said softly. "She spent a whole winter on it, working by lamplight after her chores were done. Gave it to me for my 20th birthday. Said every man needed a good coat to face the world." Victoria's eyes widened with horror. "Oh no." "Owen, I cannot keep this. It is too precious. You must take it back." But Owen shook his head firmly. "My mother would have skinned me alive if I let a woman freeze when I could have helped her. She was practical that way. Keep the coat, Victoria. It is yours now." "I will give it back once my dress dries." "Keep it forever," Owen said, surprising himself with the intensity in his voice. "I mean it. I want you to have it." Victoria stared at him, her brown eyes shining in the firelight. "I do not understand you, Owen Nash. You do not know me at all. Why would you give me something so valuable?" Owen did not have a good answer for that. He only knew that from the moment he had wrapped that coat around her shoulders, it had felt right. Like it belonged with her now, protecting her the way his mother had once protected him. "Maybe some things do not need understanding," he finally said. "Maybe they just are." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind and the crackle of the fire. Owen added more wood and checked the supplies in the shack, finding a tin of beans and some hardtack that was only slightly stale. It was not much, but it would keep them going. He warmed the beans over the fire in their tin, and they shared the meal using his knife as a makeshift spoon. "Tell me about your ranch," Victoria said as they ate. "It is small, about 100 acres in the valley below these mountains. I run cattle, mostly some horses. It is hard work, but it is mine. My father left it to me when he passed 3 years back. Do you run it alone?" "I have 2 ranch hands who help during the busy seasons. Good men, both of them. They have been with the family for years." "It sounds lonely." Owen considered that. "Sometimes it is, but there is a peace in it too. I know every rock and tree on that land. I know where the best grass grows and where the water runs cold even in summer. It is home." "I do not have a home anymore," Victoria said quietly. "I have not for a year now. You will, though. In Oregon City with your aunt." She smiled sadly. "If I can get there. I have no money for another stage and I cannot walk that far." "How far were you from Oregon City when you were attacked?" The driver said we were about 2 days out. We had been traveling for weeks. Owen made a decision then, one that would complicate his life considerably but felt inevitable nonetheless. When this storm clears, I will take you to Oregon City myself. Victoria's head snapped up. What? No, I could not ask you to do that. You have your ranch to get back to. You are not asking, I am offering. And the ranch can wait a few extra days. My hands can manage without me. But that is days out of your way, weeks probably to go there and back. Probably, Owen agreed. But what kind of man would I be if I left you stranded in the middle of nowhere with no money and outlaws potentially still in the area? A practical one, Victoria said, but there was hope blooming in her eyes. Are you certain? I feel like I have already taken so much from you. I am certain. We leave as soon as the weather permits. Victoria bit her lip, and Owen could see her fighting with her pride. Finally, she nodded. Thank you. I will find a way to repay you someday. Let us just focus on getting you there safely. The storm did not let up that night. They took turns sleeping and keeping the fire going, though Owen noticed that Victoria startled awake frequently, her eyes darting around the dark corners of the shack with fear. He did not press her to talk about what she had witnessed, but he could see the trauma sitting heavy on her shoulders. In the early morning hours, when Victoria had finally fallen into a deeper sleep, Owen allowed himself to really look at her. Even exhausted and dressed in his oversized clothes, she was lovely. There was a strength in the set of her jaw, a determination in the way she held herself even in sleep. She had been through hell and lost everything, yet she was not broken. Bent maybe, but not broken. He realized with some surprise that he wanted to know more about her, wanted to hear her laugh, see her smile when she was not terrified or traumatized. The feeling was unfamiliar. Owen had not thought much about women in the past few years, too focused on keeping the ranch running and honoring his parents' legacy. But something about Victoria Jensen had slipped past his defenses. The storm finally broke around dawn. Owen opened the door to find the world transformed into a white wonderland, snow piled high against the shack and draping the trees in heavy blankets. The sky was clearing to a pale blue, and the air was crisp and still. Victoria woke as cold air rushed into the shack. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, then seemed to remember where she was. Has it stopped just now? But we should wait a few hours for the sun to rise higher and start melting some of this snow. The going will be easier then. They spent the morning preparing for the journey. Victoria's dress was mostly dry, but when she examined it, she grimaced at the extensive tears and damage. I cannot wear this. I will scandalize everyone we meet. Keep wearing what you have on, Owen suggested. When we get to the first town, we can see about getting you some proper clothes. With what money? Victoria asked, frustration clear in her voice. Owen had been thinking about that. He had some money in his saddlebag, not a lot, but enough to cover basic supplies and modest clothing. I have got enough. I cannot keep taking from you. Think of it as a loan, then. You can pay me back when you are settled in Oregon City. Victoria looked like she wanted to argue further, but she must have realized she had no other options. She nodded reluctantly. A loan, and I will pay back every cent, I promise. They set out just after noon, Owen on his horse with Victoria seated in front of him again. She still wore his coat, and he noticed she kept touching it, running her fingers over the soft sheepskin as if to reassure herself it was real. The journey through the snow was slow and treacherous. Owen's horse struggled through drifts that sometimes came up to its belly, and more than once they had to dismount and lead the animal around particularly difficult patches. But the sun was bright, and the world around them was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. They did not talk much during the ride, both focused on the challenges of the terrain. But Owen was constantly aware of Victoria's presence, the way she fit against him, the faint scent of wood smoke that clung to her hair. She had relaxed somewhat, no longer rigid with fear as she had been the day before. It was late afternoon when they spotted smoke rising in the distance. Owen tensed, his hand moving to his revolver, but as they drew closer, he recognized the source. That is the town of Silver Creek, Colorado. Small mining town. We can get supplies there and rest for the night. Is it safe? Victoria asked nervously. Safe as any town out here. The marshal is a decent man, from what I have heard. We should report what happened to you, see if he can do anything about those outlaws. Silver Creek was a rough collection of buildings clustered around a main street. The mining operation was the heart of it, with a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and a handful of other businesses supporting the miners who worked the nearby claims. People stopped to stare as Owen and Victoria rode in, and Owen was acutely aware of how they must look, him shirtless under his blanket, and Victoria dressed in men's clothing. He stopped first at the marshal's office, a small building with bars on the windows. The marshal was a weathered man in his 50s with a thick mustache and sharp eyes that took in their appearance with interest. "Help you folks?" he asked, stepping out onto the wooden walkway. "This is Miss Victoria Jensen," Owen said, dismounting and helping her down. "She was on a stagecoach that was attacked yesterday morning about 2 miles east of here up in the high country. 4 outlaws. They killed the driver and robbed the passengers." The marshal's expression turned grim. "You are the only survivor." Victoria nodded, and Owen saw her hands begin to shake. He moved closer to her instinctively, offering silent support. "There were only 3 of us on the coach, an elderly man, myself, and the driver. The elderly man, Mr. Thompson, he tried to fight back when they demanded our belongings. They shot him, just like that. Then they killed the driver when he tried to run." "Can you describe these men?" Victoria closed her eyes, and Owen could see her forcing herself to remember. The leader had a scar across his left cheek, dark hair, dark eyes. He wore a black hat with a silver band. The others, I did not get as good a look at them. It all happened so fast. "Sounds like it might be the Garrett gang," the marshal said. "They have been working this area for a few months now, vicious bunch. We have not been able to catch them yet." "What about the bodies?" Owen asked. "If you can draw me a map to where this happened, I will ride out tomorrow with a few men to retrieve them and see what evidence we can find. But in this snow, any tracks the outlaws left will be long gone." Owen worked with the marshal to sketch out the location as best he could remember. While they talked, Victoria stood quietly, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of Owen's coat. When they finished, the marshal touched his hat respectfully to Victoria. "I am sorry for what you went through, madam. I will do everything I can to bring those men to justice." "Thank you, Marshal," Victoria said softly. Owen guided her to the general store next. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles, looked them up and down with undisguised curiosity but had the good sense not to ask questions. Owen bought a simple dress for Victoria, stockings, and a pair of sturdy boots. He also purchased a shirt for himself and supplies for the journey ahead. The store had a back room where Victoria could change, and when she emerged in the new dress, a modest gray affair with a white collar, Owen felt his breath catch. Even in the simple, practical clothing, she was striking. The dress fit her properly, unlike his oversized clothes, showing her slender figure and the graceful way she moved. "Better?" he asked. She smiled, a real smile this time, and it transformed her face. "Much better, though I miss the warmth of your shirt." "You still have the coat," Owen pointed out. "Yes." She touched it again, that same gesture he had noticed before. "I do." They took rooms at the hotel, separate rooms, because Owen was determined to maintain propriety despite their circumstances. The hotel owner, a matronly woman named Mrs. Patterson, clucked sympathetically when she heard a carefully edited version of Victoria's ordeal. "You poor dear," she said, patting Victoria's hand. "You are safe now. I will have hot water sent up for a bath, and supper will be at 6 in the dining room." That evening, Owen and Victoria sat together at a corner table in the small dining room. The meal was simple but hot and filling, beef stew with fresh bread. Victoria ate slowly, and Owen noticed she kept looking around nervously whenever someone entered or exited the room. "They are not here," he said gently. "The outlaws, I mean. They would not come into town so soon after a robbery. I know. Logically, I know that. But I keep seeing that man's face, the one with the scar, the way he smiled when he pulled the trigger." She shuddered. "I have never seen anyone die before." Owen reached across the table and covered her hand with his. It was an impulse, one that surprised him, but he did not pull away. "It will get easier, not the memory that will always be with you, but the fear, the way it grips you right now, that will fade with time. You sound like you know from experience." "I do. I was 17 when I saw my first killing, a rancher in a dispute with a neighbor over water rights. It happened right in front of me. I had nightmares for months." Victoria turned her hand over so their palms touched. Her skin was soft, but her grip was firm. "How did you get past it?" "Time, mostly, and focusing on the things I could control. I could not change what I had seen, but I could make sure my own actions honored the good in the world instead of adding to the bad." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, and Owen felt something shift between them. This was no longer just about helping a stranger in need. This was something more, something that both excited and terrified him. "I should get some rest," Victoria finally said, though she seemed reluctant to break the contact. "Tomorrow will be another long day." "Yes," Owen agreed, equally reluctant. "Rest well, Victoria. You too, Owen, and thank you, again. I feel like those are the only words I say to you anymore." "You do not need to thank me. I am glad I was there when you needed help." She stood, still wearing his coat over her new dress, and paused. "I meant what I said. I will pay you back for everything. I know you will." After she left, Owen sat alone at the table, staring at his empty plate and trying to sort through his feelings. He had known Victoria Jensen for less than 2 days, yet she had already become important to him in a way he did not fully understand. He wanted to protect her, yes, but it was more than that. He wanted to make her smile, to chase away the shadows in her eyes, to know everything about her. This was dangerous territory. Owen had always been careful with his heart, watching friends and neighbors rush into marriages that turned out to be more burden than blessing. But Victoria was different. Even in the worst circumstances, battered by trauma and loss, there was a light in her that drew him like a moth to flame. He went to his room eventually, but sleep was a long time coming. They set out early the next morning, stopping only to let the marshal know they were leaving. The man provided them with directions to Oregon City and wished them luck. The journey would take at least a week, he warned, possibly longer with the conditions of the roads after the storm. "You folks traveling alone?" the marshal asked, frowning. "That is a long way with no company." "We will be fine," Owen assured him, though he appreciated the concern. "I know the country and I am armed." The marshal nodded slowly. "Watch yourselves then, and Miss Jensen, I hope you find peace in Oregon City." "Thank you, Marshal," Victoria said. They rode west, leaving Silver Creek behind. The snow had started melting under the strong sun, turning the roads muddy and difficult, but it was manageable. Owen kept his horse to a steady pace, not wanting to exhaust the animal when they had so far to go. Victoria rode behind him now, her arms wrapped around his waist, and they fell into an easy rhythm of conversation. She told him about growing up on the farm in Missouri, about her mother's garden and her father's gentle nature. Owen shared stories about the ranch, about learning to rope cattle and break horses, about his mother's terrible cooking and his father's booming laugh. "They sound wonderful," Victoria said wistfully. "Your parents, I mean. They were. I miss them every day. I understand that feeling. Sometimes I wake up and forget, just for a moment, that they are gone. And then I remember, and it is like losing them all over again. Does your aunt know you are coming? I sent a letter before I left Missouri, but I do not know if it arrived. The mail can be so unreliable." "She will be surprised then." "I hope it is a good surprise and not an unwelcome burden." Owen twisted in the saddle to look back at her. "You are not a burden, Victoria. Stop thinking of yourself that way." She met his eyes, and something passed between them, a current of understanding and attraction that made Owen's heart beat faster. Then she smiled, soft and genuine, and rested her cheek against his shoulder. They traveled that way for hours, comfortable in each other's presence despite how recently they had met. When they stopped to rest the horse and eat some of the jerky and hardtack Owen had purchased, Victoria sat close to him on a fallen log, their shoulders touching. "Can I ask you something?" she said, breaking a piece of hardtack into smaller bits. "Of course. Why are you really doing this? Taking me all the way to Oregon City, I mean. It is so far out of your way and you barely know me." Owen had been asking himself the same question. The practical answer was that it was the right thing to do, but the truth was more complicated than that. "When I found you on that mountain," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "you were the bravest thing I had ever seen. Torn up, freezing, terrified, but still fighting to survive. Still running when most people would have given up. I guess I want to see what happens next for you. Want to make sure you get your chance at that new start you were looking for." Victoria was quiet, watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Is that the only reason?" "No," Owen admitted, meeting her gaze. "But the other reasons, I am still figuring them out myself." She nodded slowly, as if that answer satisfied her. They finished their meal in companionable silence, then continued on. That night, they camped under the stars, the weather having cleared completely. Owen built a fire and they shared his bedroll, lying on opposite sides of the flames for propriety, though Owen found himself wishing he could be closer to her. He could hear her breathing in the darkness, occasionally shifting in her sleep, and the sound was comforting in a way he had not expected. The next few days fell into a pattern. They would ride through the day, stopping frequently to rest the horse and stretch their legs. Victoria proved to be a good traveling companion, never complaining about the discomfort or the slow pace. She seemed to have a gift for finding beauty in their surroundings, pointing out interesting rock formations or the way the light hit the mountains. They talked about everything and nothing. Victoria shared her dreams of opening a small school someday, teaching children to read and write. Owen described his plans to expand the ranch, maybe add some sheep to diversify his income. They discussed books they had read, places they hoped to see, philosophies about life and death and everything in between. On the fourth night, camped near a small creek, Victoria asked Owen to tell her about the coat again. "I told you my mother made it for me," he said, confused by the request. "No, tell me about her while she was making it. What was she like?" So Owen did, describing his mother's small frame and iron will, the way she hummed while she worked, her insistence on doing things right even if it took longer. He talked about sitting with her in the evenings, watching her strong fingers work the needle and thread, the way she would occasionally hold the coat up and examine it critically before diving back in. "She sounds remarkable," Victoria said softly when he finished. "You must have loved her very much." "I did, still do, I suppose. Love does not stop just because someone is gone." Victoria was wearing the coat as always, and she pulled it tighter around herself. "I promise to take good care of it, to honor her memory." "I know you will." On the 6th day, they reached a larger town called Riverside, Wyoming. It was a trading post at the intersection of two major routes, busy with travelers and merchants. They restocked their supplies, and Owen sent a telegram to his ranch hands letting them know he would be delayed longer than expected. That evening at the hotel in Riverside, Victoria knocked on Owen's door. When he opened it, she was holding his coat folded carefully in her arms. "I had it cleaned," she said. "The hotel has a service. I wanted to since I have been wearing it constantly. You did not need to do that. I wanted to. Owen, can I come in? Just for a few minutes. I want to talk to you about something." He stepped aside, acutely aware of the impropriety of having an unmarried woman in his room, but trusting that Victoria had good reason. She sat on the single chair while he settled on the edge of the bed. "I have been thinking," she began, her fingers tracing the edge of his coat, "about what happens when we reach Oregon City, when this journey ends." Owen felt his stomach tighten. He had been trying not to think about that, about the fact that in a few more days they would say goodbye and he would ride back to his ranch alone. "What about it?" he asked carefully. "I do not want it to end," Victoria said, the words coming out in a rush. "This us, whatever this is. These past few days with you have been, despite everything that happened before, some of the best of my life. I feel like I can breathe around you, like I can be myself without pretense or fear." Owen's heart was racing. "Victoria, I feel the same way, but I do not want to take advantage of you. You have been through a trauma. Your emotions are heightened. I would not forgive myself if I pushed for something you might regret later." She stood then, setting the coat aside, and crossed the small space between them. "I am not confused about how I feel. Yes, I have been through hell. Yes, everything is complicated and uncertain. But I know my own heart, Owen Nash, and it is telling me very clearly that what I feel for you is real." Owen stood as well, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. "I am falling in love with you," he said, the words escaping before he could think better of them. "I have been since the moment I wrapped that coat around you, maybe even before that." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you too. It is crazy and fast and probably foolish, but I do. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you see me as someone worth saving." "You saved yourself," Owen said. "I just helped you along the way." Then he was kissing her, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as she responded with equal passion. Her arms wrapped around his neck and his circled her waist, pulling her close. They stood like that for a long moment, the rest of the world falling away until there was only the two of them and this feeling that was too big to contain. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Come back to Colorado with me. After we see your aunt, after you know she is well and willing to care for you if needed, come see the ranch. Give us a chance to see what this could be." "Yes," Victoria said without hesitation. "Yes, I will, but let us take it one step at a time. First Oregon City, then we figure out the rest." She left his room shortly after, both of them aware that they were treading a fine line between propriety and desire. But Owen felt lighter than he had in years, hope blooming in his chest like spring flowers after a long winter. They reached Oregon City 8 days after leaving Silver Creek. The town was larger than Owen had expected, bustling with activity as people prepared for winter. It was situated along the Willamette River in the Oregon Territory, with neat streets and well-maintained buildings that spoke of prosperity and community. Victoria directed Owen to her aunt's address, a shop on one of the main streets with living quarters above. The sign read Patterson Mercantile in neat letters, and through the window, Owen could see shelves stocked with everything from fabric to farming tools. "This is it," Victoria said, her voice nervous. "What if she does not remember me? What if the letter never arrived and she has no idea who I am?" "Then we will explain," Owen said calmly, "but I imagine she will be happy to see you." They dismounted and tied Owen's horse to the post outside. Victoria smoothed her dress, still wearing Owen's coat despite having proper clothing now, and took a deep breath. Owen offered her his arm and she took it gratefully. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. A woman looked up from behind the counter, middle-aged with kind eyes and hair going gray at the temples. Her expression went from professional welcome to shock in the span of a heartbeat. "Victoria," she gasped. "Victoria, is that really you?" "Hello, Aunt Margaret," Victoria said, her voice breaking. Margaret came around the counter quickly, pulling Victoria into a fierce embrace. "Oh, my dear child, we got your letter weeks ago. We have been worried sick wondering when you would arrive. The stagecoach companies had no record of you and we feared the worst." "There was an accident," Victoria said, stepping back but keeping hold of her aunt's hands. "The stage was robbed. Everyone else was killed. If not for Owen, I would have died too." Margaret turned her attention to Owen then, her eyes taking in his worn clothes and weathered face with a shrewd gaze. "Owen Nash, madam. I found Victoria during a blizzard and have been helping her reach you safely." "Then I owe you a debt I can never repay," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for bringing my niece back to me." A man emerged from the back room, tall and balding with a gentle smile. "Margaret, what is all the commotion, oh my?" "Thomas, this is Victoria. She is here. She is safe." Uncle Thomas immediately came forward, shaking Victoria's hand warmly and then Owen's. "This calls for celebration. Come upstairs. We will have tea and you can tell us everything." The living quarters above the shop were warm and inviting, filled with comfortable furniture and the smell of fresh bread. Margaret bustled about making tea while Thomas settled Victoria and Owen at the table. Over the next hour, Victoria told them everything, with Owen filling in details when her voice grew too strained. Margaret cried openly when she heard about the deaths on the stagecoach, and Thomas's face grew grim with anger. "Those men will hang when they are caught," he said firmly. "The law will see to that." "I hope so," Victoria said quietly. "And you, Mr. Nash," Margaret said, turning to Owen with a thoughtful expression. "You have gone far beyond what anyone could expect, taking Victoria all the way here from Colorado, providing for her." "How can we ever thank you properly? Seeing her safe with family is thanks enough," Owen said, though his heart was heavy with the knowledge that this was goodbye. But Victoria reached under the table and found his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Owen is more than just a rescuer, Aunt Margaret. He has become important to me." Margaret's eyes sharpened with understanding, flicking between Victoria and Owen. "I see. How important?" "Very important," Victoria said firmly. "I have asked him to stay in Oregon City for a few days so we can spend more time together." "With your permission, of course." Thomas and Margaret exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations that long married couples perfected. Finally, Margaret smiled. "Of course he can stay. We have a spare room here above the shop, or if he prefers, the hotel down the street is clean and reasonable." "The hotel would be more appropriate," Owen said, not wanting to presume. "Nonsense," Thomas said. "Any friend of Victoria's is welcome here. Consider yourself our guest, Mr. Nash." So Owen found himself settling into the spare room in the Patterson home, a small but comfortable space with a window overlooking the street. That evening, the four of them had dinner together, and Owen found himself genuinely liking Victoria's aunt and uncle. They were good people, hardworking and honest, and they clearly adored Victoria despite not having seen her since she was a child. Over the next few days, Owen and Victoria explored Oregon City together. She showed him the river where she had played as a child during a brief visit years ago, and they walked through the market where vendors sold everything from fresh fish to hand-carved furniture. They talked constantly, learning more about each other, deepening the connection that had formed during their journey. On the fourth evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the river, Victoria brought up the future. "I do not want to stay here permanently," she said. "I love my aunt and uncle and I am grateful to them, but Oregon City does not feel like home." "What does feel like home?" Owen asked, though he hoped he knew the answer. "You," Victoria said simply. "Wherever you are, that is where I want to be. Is that crazy?" "To feel that way after such a short time. If it is, then we are both crazy," Owen said. "Because I feel the same way. Victoria Jensen, would you consider coming back to Colorado with me? Not just to visit, but to stay, to build a life there together." "As what?" Victoria asked, her eyes searching his. Owen stood and pulled her to her feet, taking both her hands in his. "As my wife, if you will have me. I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a couple of weeks, but I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my life. I love you, Victoria. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build that life we have been talking about together." Victoria was crying again, but she was also laughing. "Yes, yes, Owen, I will marry you. I want all of that too." He kissed her then, not caring who might see, pouring all his love and hope into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, Victoria was still wearing his coat despite the mild evening, and she touched it almost reverently. "You gave me this coat and told me to keep it forever," she said. "I think you gave me your heart at the same time." "I did," Owen agreed, "and I have never regretted it for a moment." They walked back to the mercantile hand in hand, and Owen asked Thomas for Victoria's hand in marriage. The older man agreed readily, clearly happy for his niece. Margaret cried again, but these were tears of joy, and she immediately began planning a small wedding ceremony. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Oregon City, with Margaret and Thomas as witnesses, and a handful of the couple's new friends in attendance. Victoria wore a simple white dress that Margaret helped her make, and Owen wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. But the most important thing Victoria wore was Owen's sheepskin coat over her dress as they exited the church, a symbol of where their love had begun. The journey back to Colorado took 2 weeks, but it felt like a honeymoon rather than a hardship. They traveled slowly, camping under the stars and stealing kisses whenever the mood struck. Owen taught Victoria how to handle a gun, insisting that she needed to be able to protect herself on the frontier. She proved to be a natural shot, and Owen felt pride watching her confidence grow. When they finally reached the ranch, Owen's 2 hands, Jake and Samuel, were there to greet them. Both men welcomed Victoria warmly and immediately set about helping her feel at home. The ranch house was modest, just 3 rooms, but Victoria set about making it a home with energy and enthusiasm. Those first months were hard but good. Victoria learned how to manage a ranch household, and Owen discovered he loved having a partner to share both the work and the rewards. They fell into bed exhausted most nights, but always found energy to hold each other, to talk about their day, to make love with a passion that never seemed to diminish. The first winter was harsh, testing them both, but they weathered it together. Victoria proved to be resourceful and tough, never complaining about the isolation or the hard work. She started teaching reading to some of the children from neighboring ranches, fulfilling her dream of being a teacher in a small way. In the spring, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. Owen was overjoyed, already imagining a son or daughter running around the ranch. Victoria glowed with happiness, and even morning sickness could not dim her excitement. Their son was born in the autumn, a healthy baby with Owen's blonde hair and Victoria's brown eyes. They named him Thomas Owen Nash after both their fathers. Holding his son for the first time, Owen felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," Victoria whispered from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "Like his mother," Owen said, kissing her forehead gently. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing larger and more successful than Owen's father had ever managed. Victoria's teaching expanded into a small schoolhouse Owen built for her, and children came from miles around to learn from her. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Eleanor Margaret Nash 2 years after Thomas, and another son, William, 3 years after that. The house rang with laughter and chaos, and Owen often found himself marveling at how full his life had become. Victoria kept Owen's coat all those years, treating it like the treasure it was. She wore it sometimes on cold winter days, though it was worn and patched in places now. When their children asked about it, she would tell them the story of how their father had saved her life and given her his coat, telling her to keep it forever. "And I did," she would always finish, smiling at Owen across the room. "I kept the coat and the man, and I have never regretted either for a single moment." Thomas grew into a strong young man, helping his father run the ranch with skill and dedication. Eleanor proved to have her mother's gift for teaching and her father's practical nature, a combination that served her well. William was the dreamer of the family, always sketching landscapes and telling elaborate stories. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Owen and Victoria took a rare trip alone, leaving the children with Jake and Samuel. They rode up into the mountains to the place where they had first met all those years ago. The line shack was still standing, weathered but intact. "You remember?" Owen asked, dismounting and helping Victoria down. "Every moment," she said, looking around with tears in her eyes. "I was so scared, so lost, and then you appeared like something out of a dream." "You were the bravest person I had ever seen," Owen said, pulling her close. "You still are." They spent the night in the line shack, just the 2 of them, talking and remembering and reaffirming their love. In the morning, they carved their initials into the doorframe, a marker for any who might stumble upon this place in the future that something important had happened here. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Owen's ranch hands eventually retired, replaced by his son Thomas and a few new men. Victoria's school gained such a reputation that families moved to the area specifically to have their children learn from her. The little ranch that Owen had inherited grew into a substantial operation, respected throughout the territory. When Colorado achieved statehood in 1876, Owen and Victoria traveled to the celebration in Denver, proud to be part of this new chapter in history. They watched the fireworks with their grown children and young grandchildren, Thomas having married a local rancher's daughter and started a family of his own. "We have been blessed," Victoria said that night as they prepared for bed in their hotel room. "We have," Owen agreed, pulling her close. "More than I ever imagined possible. Do you ever think about that day, the blizzard, the outlaws, all of it?" "Sometimes. But mostly I think about what came after, about building a life with you, raising our children, growing old together," he smiled. "Well, we are not that old yet." Victoria laughed, the same bright sound he had fallen in love with all those years ago. "We have a few good years left in us." As they settled into bed, Victoria pulled an old sheepskin coat from her traveling bag. It was Owen's coat, the one he had given her that fateful day. It was worn now, the leather soft with age and the sheepskin thin in places. But Victoria still kept it, still treasured it as the symbol of their love. "Forever," she murmured, running her fingers over it one more time before setting it carefully aside. "Forever," Owen echoed, pulling her into his arms. The years turned into decades. Alina married a lawyer from Denver and moved to the city, though she visited often with her children. William became an artist, his paintings of Western landscapes gaining recognition throughout the territory. Thomas took over the ranch completely when Owen decided to finally retire, and he ran it with the same dedication and love that his father had. Owen and Victoria grew old together, their love never diminishing even as their bodies slowed. They spent their days sitting on the porch of the house. Owen had expanded over the years, watching their grandchildren play in the yard and reminiscing about their long, full life together. Victoria's health began to fail when she was in her 70s, her strong body finally succumbing to the hard life she had led. Owen cared for her tenderly, never leaving her side for long, determined that she would not face this last journey alone. One spring evening, as the sun set over the mountains they both loved, Victoria took Owen's hand and smiled weakly. "No regrets," she whispered. "None," Owen said, his voice breaking. "You gave me everything, Victoria, everything that mattered." "The coat," she said, her voice barely audible. "Give it to Thomas. Tell him the story. Make sure he knows how it all began." "I will, I promise." "I love you, Owen Nash, forever, just like you said." "I love you too, forever and always." Victoria closed her eyes then, her hand still in Owen's, and slipped away peacefully. Owen sat with her through the night, holding her hand, remembering every moment of their decades together. The grief was overwhelming, but it was matched by gratitude for the life they had shared. He buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a tree they had planted together in their first year of marriage. The whole community turned out for the funeral, testament to the woman Victoria had been and the impact she had made. That evening, Owen called Thomas to him and handed him the old sheepskin coat, now nearly 50 years old. Through his tears, he told his son the story of how he had met Victoria, how he had given her this coat and told her to keep it forever, and how that simple act of kindness had led to a lifetime of love. "Your mother kept this coat her whole life," Owen said, his voice rough with emotion. "She said it represented the moment everything changed, the moment she found her home. I want you to have it now, to remember where you came from and the love that made this family possible." Thomas took the coat reverently, tears streaming down his face. "I will treasure it, Pa. And I will make sure my children know the story, and their children after them." Owen lived another 5 years after Victoria's death, long enough to see his great-grandchildren born and to know that the ranch would continue to thrive under Thomas's care. He never remarried, never even considered it. Victoria had been his one great love, and he was content to carry her memory with him until they could be reunited. When Owen's time finally came, he died peacefully in his sleep, and his children buried him next to Victoria on that hill. They placed a simple stone marker that read, "Owen Nash and Victoria Nash, 2 hearts, one forever." The coat, that old sheepskin coat that had started it all, remained in the family for generations, carefully preserved, and the story of its significance passed down through the years. It became a symbol of enduring love, of how one act of kindness in a moment of crisis could change the course of multiple lives. The ranch continued to prosper, growing with each generation, but never losing the heart that Owen and Victoria had built into it. Their descendants always remembered that it had all begun with a cowboy who gave a freezing woman his coat and told her to keep it forever, not knowing that he was giving her his heart at the same time. And on quiet winter evenings, when the snow fell soft and thick over the Colorado mountains. Family members would gather around the fire and take turns holding that old coat, running their fingers over the worn leather and soft sheepskin, and remembering the love story that had made them all possible. They would think of Owen and Victoria, of blizzards and kindness, of bravery and second chances, and of a love that had truly lasted forever, just as Owen had promised that day when he wrapped his coat around a stranger's shoulders and changed both their lives irrevocably. The legend of Owen and Victoria Nash became part of the fabric of the community, a story parents told their children about true love and selflessness. The schoolhouse Victoria had started continued to serve children for decades, and eventually, a historical marker was placed there, commemorating her contributions to education in the territory. Through it all, through the changing times and the modernization of the West, the core of their story remained the same, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create legacies that lasted far beyond a single lifetime. It was a story of two people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful together, one day at a time, for the rest of their lives. And somewhere in whatever comes after, Owen and Victoria Nash were together still, their love undiminished by time or distance, eternal as the mountains they had called home, and as enduring as the coat that had brought them together on a cold winter day when fate and chance conspired to create something truly magical.